This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphics. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, the founder of a modernist archive shares why this building style still appeals today. We visit a contemporary craft exhibition in the English Midlands, plus we preview some design stories in Monocle magazine's February issue. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. We start today in the United States, where we hear from George Smart. He's the executive director and founder of US Modernist, the world's largest online resource for modernist residential architecture. Serving as an archive for information about modernist houses, it offers an extensive library of publications dating back 130 years. It's quite the resource. George joined us to discuss this repository and its importance today, and what new executive orders from the White House could mean for this architectural style.
When you walk into a mid-century modernist house, it immediately feels different than going into a conventional house. Not that it's any better necessarily, it's just different. And that vibe is more relaxed, more open. You feel like you're really connecting with the space. And you can go into a typical flat somewhere and, you have an oven and you have a living room and you have a bedroom and a bathroom, and it's fine. And it may be very nice, but modernist architecture really takes care to create a kind of experience that is quite positive and people love it.
I mean, so that vibe, that experience, you mentioned Donald Trump's back in office and is a big fan of classical architecture. There's an executive order where he wants to see government buildings built in that style. That's certainly not the mid-century style. We've talked about maybe why people love it. Why do you think people don't like it?
There's been a movement for a number of years, even before Trump, from people that are classicist. They love traditional Greco-Roman architecture, which I do too. It's really fascinating that almost all modernist fans like classical too. It's a diversity of styles. But a lot of classicists hate modernism and want it to be gone from federal government spending. Now, the way that buildings have been determined over the last 50, 60 years have been a set of rules that our United States Government General Services Administration follows. It's called the Moynihan Protocol, essentially, which calls for a range of styles, including classical, including modernist, including other kinds of styles along the way, so that it represents a breadth of America. The movement right now, though, is to try to destroy or redeploy or sell a lot of the landmark buildings that are in Washington, D.C. particularly. And I think with not the headwinds, the tailwinds that our current administration have are just buffeting them along. They'll probably be successful.
What does that mean? Does that mean we're likely to lose, does this put these sorts of buildings at risk?
It does. The buildings will likely be repurposed for some other kind of use. Maybe they'll be sold, maybe they'll be auctioned off. I suspect at least several of them will be torn down, which is a tragedy because these are beautiful modernist buildings that could be reworked in a way and made useful for another 50 years.
So that's why I'm also curious about this archive that you've got, because, we're talking about Trump potentially, could lead to the demolition of buildings. Equally, there have been some pretty significant buildings that have been destroyed by the recent Los Angeles wildfires. The Craig Elwood residence was also destroyed last year. So there's some quite famous buildings that have fallen in the last year or so. What's the value of, say, having the Craig Elwood residence in your archive?
We have two kinds of archives. We have an archive of well-known architects, and we aspire to have every house they've ever designed, which is a different approach than most archives. Most archives are tied to a geography. Say if you are in Chicago, you try to find information on all the Chicago area houses. We'll take an architect like Craig Elwood and locate every house that he designed in his career and do that over and over again for about 180 different architects. So that when you see something that's by a particular architect in a town, you can see the rest of their work. You can see the pattern of how their thoughts on design changed over time. And you can get design ideas and be inspired to do things on your own. It also provides a historical record for these houses because they change hands. And people forget. They forget who designed it. They forget who built it. They forget what some of the original items were, perhaps in the house or structural features. So between our house archive and our magazine archive, which has the publications of the day that featured these houses, people can go back and get great information about what they want to do next. This came into real use about the Elwood House in LA that was destroyed. There is a guy in New York who is going to rebuild that house. It was called the Zimmerman House. And he was able to go into our magazine archive and find press coverage of it and essentially reverse engineer the house from the photos so that he'll be able to build a new version of it in New York.
I mean, that's phenomenal. And what they want to do next was a great phrase that you've just said then, which I love. And, you know, to kind of maybe bring these two threads we've got going together of the Trump and the documentation. I mean, you talked a little bit about the potential to repurpose these buildings. How key is that, I guess, to appreciating this kind of architecture and ensuring that we evolve and we're not stuck in a nostalgic past?
I mean, reuse is a real key component now for a number of reasons. One is it's much more climate friendly. To tear down a building, and particularly a large building like these buildings are in Washington, and rebuild them from scratch is, first of all, incredibly expensive. And secondly, produces more carbon for the planet than necessary. You can take the structure of these buildings and renovate them from the inside and turn them into really whatever you want. It's a great starting point for any developer on a project.
So starting point for a developer on the project, but equally, you know, you're talking about the Zimmerman House and rebuilding this from scratch in New York. You talked about this as a kind of architecture that continues right up to today. How do we make this feel contemporary?
Things evolve all the time. Building codes change for our safety. Technology changes. But the vibe that we talked about earlier lives on. You want to create a space and a structure and a scale that is relaxing for your personal living. And that's the eternal gift of modernist residential design, is that vibe. So while the materials of your house may be different than they were in 1946, or the technology is a little different, you still get the same kind of end result, which is part of what makes them so attractive.
I guess a lot of architecture does kind of carry the mark of its time, but maybe what you're saying here is that the mark of mid-century architecture is about that vibe rather than necessarily stylistic.
It's been around a long time. People continue to want to build in that style for their new houses.
Are we at risk of maybe getting stuck in the past if we're using these as a precedent? If you don't mind me asking, you know, such a blunt question.
Sure. No, sure. Keep in mind, this is not a mainstream tidal wave of modernism sweeping the country. This has always been a very small movement. I estimate that modernist houses are maybe 1/4 of 1% of the housing stock in the United States. This is not really affecting the world of architecture in a giant way, but it continues on with very loyal fans.
And I guess that's why I'm curious. It is a small movement, and you mentioned the tiny proportion of homes that are actually built in this style, or more broadly, buildings built in this style. To come maybe full circle on this, why does it stay with us?
You look at a number of these buildings, and just right from the curb or the street, they're different. They're inspiring. They invite you to want to look. They invite questions. They invite curiosity. They give people ideas for elements they want to have in where they live or where they work. They just reach out to you in that way that affects people. I know that a lot of people don't like modernist houses, but they've never been in one. So, for instance, I frequently get email from one half of a couple who's a modernist fan, and they want to get their other half to be fans, and they're asking for advice because they want to move somewhere, build a house, whatever. And my advice always is take a long weekend, go rent one of these modernist houses, and let your partner experience waking up in them in the morning, smelling the coffee and tea go through the house, look at the way the light comes in during the day, at sunset, things like that. And they start to go, oh, so this is why people are so crazy about them.
Sounds like you're almost working like a marriage counselor a little bit as well.
In that context, yes. Very reasonable rates.
This is good to know. I hope there's some sort of referral fee there. I'm also curious, if I'm going to build a house from scratch, I want it in the modernist style, but maybe I don't want it to feel like it's a Disneyland-esque recreation of a home. What approach should I take? Am I diving into your archive and looking at precedents, but how do I make sure that it still feels contemporary? How do you strike that balance?
Well, here's the funny thing is that you can look at some of these houses from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They look as modern as today, many of them. They always are about the future. And one of the things that people comment all the time is that the modernist movement in architecture was very optimistic. The future was going to be great. We were going to have conquered all these social problems. We were going to be holding hands, singing songs off into the future. That was the vibe at the time. I think that kind of optimism still exists in small part within the design community. So if you're looking to have a house of your own, again, the best advice is to visit as many as you can in your area. In the United States, you can use our archive to find them, but in the UK and other countries, there are many organizations that love these. The international one is called DOCOMOMO, and it stands for the Documentation and Conservation of the Modern Movement. And most of the countries in Europe have a DOCOMOMO chapter. These are like-minded people who are into modernism and can provide resources and ideas for you to follow.
And then I guess just finally, I mean, there's been a little bit of doom and gloom in this chat and maybe a little bit of doom and gloom across the globe at the moment. But these houses were built with an optimism. What should we be excited about in this world of architecture and mid-century modernism?
There's so much potential for big projects, airports, museums, office buildings, hotels, to inspire people. And these projects are going up all over the world. You see them with Lord Norman Foster buildings. You see them with Bjarke Ingels buildings. You come up to them and go, wow, this is incredible. I want to go inside. They invite you in. And they are designed so well, usually, that they allow sometimes millions of people to go through them. If you go through a metro station in London, for instance, and just pay attention to what's around you, some of the new ones, you can see how it's been very thoughtfully done to consider how do you process 500,000 or 3 million people through this transit hub in a day and make the experience as pleasant for them as possible. And that translates from that kind of big public works project all the way down to a little 1,500 square foot house you want for your own.
That was George Smart, and if you want to find out more, visit usmodernist.org. Here, you can explore the magazine and drawing library, which features 23,000 modernist homes. You can also tune in to US Modernist Radio, hosted by George, which is all about architecture and jazz. Next on today's program, we head to the English Midlands to visit the Made in the Middle showcase, on at Leicester Gallery. From Birmingham's Jewellery Quarter to the glass industry in Stourbridge, the creative industries have long been the cornerstone of this region's identity, which is on show at the exhibition. Monocle's Maisie Ringer went along to have a look.
In 1988, the charity Craft Space set out with the intention of showcasing Midlands craft to a wider audience. Organisers sought to highlight bold new ideas, uncover emerging talent and reimagine traditional craft techniques and materials in fresh and exciting ways. Nearly 40 years later, I'm here at Leicester Gallery for the 9th exhibition in Craft Space's Made in the Middle series, which continues to celebrate ingenuity and creativity across the East and West Midlands. So how has Midlands art evolved over the years? Deirdre Figueredo, director of Craft Space, has been a key figure in the region's art scene for over 3 decades. As Deirdre explains, the exhibition offers a valuable insight into contemporary social issues and the ways in which craft continues to engage with them.
Each time, it's a wonderful, amazing look at how societal, technological and environmental changes have impacted making. we're marking the quarter of the 21st century. So 25 years of this century just gives us that moment, I think, to reflect a bit more and think, what's changed since the last time we did this exhibition? Problem solving around the climate crisis, that's probably the number one thing in a way. So the material exploration has really changed. Research into biomaterials has really come on in the last 10, 15 years in a way that we wouldn't have seen 30 years ago. So you would have people using natural materials in the past, basketry and all of those sorts of things, but biomaterials, eggshells, fungi, mixing them with modern materials and techniques has not been done before. And of course, we've added digital toolbox to that as well. So I think that is quite remarkable, that some of the problem solving that artists are able to do. The other special thing to mention really about the exhibition this time round is that we put a lot of effort into making it very open, very accessible, and so I think we have, as a result, got a fantastically diverse show, a lot of very diverse people exhibiting, but also diverse voices, diverse ways of thinking, neurodivergent ways of thinking. There's something for everyone here in that respect.
The celebration of diverse perspectives was enhanced by the inaugural introduction of a guest curator. Curator Jazz Swali selected 6 artists to highlight the cultural impact of global migration on the region. As Deirdre highlights, while such narratives are inherently woven into the fabric of Midland society, they are often overlooked.
We've never really, in the 30 years, properly explored the role that migration has played in the Midlands and the strengthening of its culture.
I was going to say, to what extent do you think the Midlands' cultural identity is shaped by those communities?
I think there's no question that it's shaped by those communities, particularly the urban areas, I think we'd have to say. And the last census that was in 2022, I think the results of that census showed that Birmingham is the first minority-majority city. And so I think there's so much influence, so many ideas that are, fluid back and forwards between the diaspora that those people are connected to. And I think that really gives the Midlands an edge.
From a vibrant hand-stitched textile piece celebrating Central and Eastern European migrant mothers to a gold-threaded tapestry that highlights the omission of Muslim women from historical narratives, the artwork in the gallery reflects the place of diaspora voices within Midlands communities. One of the guest-curated artists shining a light on overlooked narratives is Chris Day.
I'm a glass artist and I produce works out of glass that represent anything from the slave trade to the civil rights movement to identity.
And can you describe this piece we've got in front of us right now?
Okay, so this piece is called Under the Influence. So I got invited to do an exhibition at Harewood House in Leeds, and at that time they'd found 28 rum bottles in the cellars which were produced during the slave trade. And I wanted to produce a piece of work that represented that. It was the actual journey of them being enslaved from Africa and then going across the waters of the transatlantic slave routes that you'll see in the bottles. You'll see these ripples of silver and blues, which represent the sea crossing, and then it looks like the rum. It looks like the molasses of the day, and also it's encased in this copper cage. I'm a plumbing and heating engineer, but I wanted to show people that a plumber can produce artwork, but also the copper represents so much more. It's encasing this glass that's trying to break free from it, and also copper was produced to make manillas, the currency to buy Africans. So it's as if it's gone full circle. It's not just me being a plumber. I'm using a material that's copper that was actually used to buy Africans and enslave them. And even on the top, how can you turn a bottle into this human form? And then I thought, well, I can put the top as a rope representing braided hair, and that was the finishing, that was the stopper of the bottle itself. But they have got a human form to them. I'm just trying to engage a conversation. That is the most important thing. This is like a magpie effect for people. When they see the glass, it's not your art critics, it's not people that are into art, it's the bloke that goes down to the pub or goes to the football match. It's the family that visit the museum. They're all intrigued by the colours and the shininess.
Through his glasswork, Chris says he's been able to better understand his own history and make sense of his experiences growing up in the Midlands.
This has been a journey. I mean, I only started in 2019, but what the glasses gave me and all this support is it's given me the confidence to talk about my own heritage, my own identity. And being mixed race, growing up in the 80s, I hid it all. I didn't want to talk about not having a father figure in front of me. I didn't want to talk about any of them aspects. I hid a lot. But like I say, the glasses gave me the confidence, and the people that have supported me, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said anything. I'd have denied everything. But now I want to say things to encourage other people to be brave enough to talk about their heritage. My work's gone from telling stories that I've uncovered from books or on the internet to telling my own story, but intertwining it with the racism and the heritage and everything else.
Encouraging others to engage with their own sense of identity is an aim echoed by artist Jade Webb. Jade specialises in sustainable weaving, creating pieces that embrace the natural wanderings of her mind during the weaving process, including mistakes, to reveal insights into her own cognitive patterns. Much like Chris, her art became a way for her to engage with her own ways of thinking.
I'm neurodivergent, so weaving for me, it really calms me down and it really focuses my mind because my mind's all over the place. You kind of need to get the pattern right, but I would find often that if I let my mind wander, I'd miss lines or kind of repeat them, and then I'd have to unpick them and try and make it perfect. So this one, it was quite nice to try and just make a feature of it and not worry and just kind of get in my zone and just weave, and it's been really nice to just kind of not have that pressure to make it perfect.
Do you feel like you learned about your own neurodivergency as you're making the piece, or do you kind of feel like it was just a way to talk about it?
A bit of both. So I've never really talked about it much before. I did one piece, and it was like a big yellow one made of raffia, and I did the same. I did a very simple pattern and just let the mistakes go, and it kind of got a really positive response. Because I put it onto something tangible, it allowed me to talk about it. So it's just like, here's my work, and it's about me. But it kind of opened up other people a bit, so that was quite nice.
For Monocle in Leicester, I'm Maisie Ringer.
For a celebration of all things print, tune in to The Stack, featuring expert analysis, the view of magazine veterans, and a look at what's flying off newsstands around the world.
This is very unique, to be able to buy a magazine and to find that many doors which you can open and that lead you into very different worlds.
Listen to The Stack and hear Fernando Augusto Pacheco in conversation with our favorite editors. The Stack airs every Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Make it part of your must-listen lineup, live or on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's associate editor, Grace Charlton. Grace, we're going to preview some of the stories in Monocle's February issue.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about this. I personally really liked a story on Villa Volman, which is this beautiful modernist residence in Czechia. Tell us about visiting that, writing this. What were your takeaways?
This was reported on an enormous Czech road trip I did almost 18 months ago, where we did a survey of all this amazing architecture and design in Czechia. This was actually the final stop on the road trip. It was just a little bit outside of Prague. Villa Volman, built in the 1930s, prime example of Czech modernism. But I was there with the photographer Connie Murbach, and as we kind of wandered around this villa with its current owner, I guess, or caretaker as well, her dad owns it. It's a family affair, Zuzana Kadlakova. We were just struck by its beauty, and we realised that it maybe deserved to be something a little bit more than a passing comment in a bigger survey. It's this whole restoration to its former glory. So following the Communist Revolution in 1948, a host of buildings were nationalised, including the Villa Volman, which was initially designed as a family home. And it was turned into a kindergarten and used as such for decades until the 1990s, when communism collapsed and a host of different buildings fell into disrepair. This was one of them. It was purchased a couple of decades ago and it was in such a state that it took 15 years to carefully restore it. Marek Tichy is a local architect who worked on the project. But what I think is so beautiful about this, rather than transforming it back into a family home, which might have been the temptation for Susanna, she lives in the area, her family's from the area, they've instead turned it into a house museum. It's semi-public. You have to apply to go and visit. But it's an opportunity to, I guess, bring people into a wonderful, magnificent home. There are all these incredible details, little fireplaces built into structural uprights, banisters and awnings that have little circles cut out in them to play with the light that comes into the space, gorgeous use of paint, amazing inbuilt cabinetry. It's like a true wonder. And it's just one of those things that if you don't know somebody that owns a villa, you don't get a chance to come in and see these spaces and maybe take them and apply them to your own home. And I mean, you've only seen the images of it, but is there a detail or something that you'd love to incorporate into a space of your own?
I felt really inspired by the colours, really vibrant red mixed with a bit of a softer orange hue, some mint green details, if I'm correct. And I found that super inspirational. And it's very functional. You can tell by the way it's been laid out and the furniture. So it's, I really want to go now.
I mean, it does, and it makes the most of its footprint too. There's a beautiful rooftop garden, and this maybe isn't the inspiration that you need. As part of the programming for the space to bring people in, they run yoga retreats there, rooftop yoga.
Oh my gosh.
Might be one for you and your mum to sign up to.
I'm also super interested in the Herzog and de Meuron Children's Hospital in Zurich. It's so beautiful. This is very chic.
Yeah, it's this amazing, predominantly timber building on the outskirts of Zurich. And what I think is magnificent about it is it's such a departure from what you would typically expect from a hospital. It looks like a day spa. It truly looks like somewhere where you go on your yoga retreats. Like, I think that's the sort of world that we're entering into. But what I do like is that they're tapping into the potential of timber as a material that can also have a healing process. I mean, there's numerous studies that show that just exposure to wood can help ease the strain on your sympathetic nervous system, which ultimately is good for your recovery. And I think that's what's so nice about this building. So in addition to the timber, there's also like gardens spread throughout the space, and they're in these central courtyards, which brings in a host of natural light. So it's all these kind of things that you would almost want in a home: gentle lighting, beautiful raw natural materials, and yet it's still, met all the certifications for things like hygiene and sterility that ensures that, these children that are not in a great way are still being looked after really, really carefully. What I wanted to throw back to you is Herzog and de Meuron have really shaken up what you would expect from a hospital. What's another building or architectural typology that you would like to see shaken up? Where do we need to turn our attention with some natural timber and natural light?
Yeah, I would definitely like to see a renovation of London's tube stations. I find them very uninspiring most of the time, and it's sad because it's the oldest tube network in the world and we don't have any sort of beauty. When you're in Paris, it's a lot more beautiful, or like St. Petersburg also has some beautiful stations. So
what are we talking? Are we talking better lighting? Because it does.
Yeah, better
it feels
lighting,
very
less like broken panels everywhere and sort of wet floors for no reason. Not very inspirational to get on the tube every day. What about you, Nick Manise? I think I know your answer.
Supermarkets, yeah, for sure. I mean, this is I only go to my corner shop because I can't handle the big chains. Just like, I understand you need good lighting to be able to clearly see products, but I also think there's a way you can do it without really intense overhead lighting. Maybe some nice gentle up lighting on the shelves. Something. I'm serious. Maybe some nice gentle uplighting on the shelves. Let's do away with the plastic. Let's bring in some beautiful timber. Something that I want to see in my own home. Basically, I want to turn my own pantry into a supermarket. I think that's where we're going with this. Maybe that's a nice place to wrap this up before I start revealing too much more personal information about my house. Grace Charlton, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle on Design.
Thanks, Nick.
And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. February's is on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.